Come tell them what you wanted to do from the very beginning.
What I wanted to do, I wanted to get the cheapest drywall we could find and just slap it up there with like paint rollers and some newspaper, and so we could get straight to work on the projects.
That's what Tom wanted us to do.
But you wanted to have everything perfect. You wanted it over-engineered, built to last.
Hey, I already talked about the fact that I wanted, that Tom illustrated to me or pointed out to me that I have a hard time distinguishing between craftsmanship and construction work. Hey. And I admit I can't do that.
But once we got to choosing paint, I mean, this place looks vibrant. It's like a 1950s garage.
Yes, but the paint is going to be the next video, so we can't talk about the paint in this video except for what you just did.
Just the construction.
Yeah, just the construction. No, this is about the ceiling. The ceiling joists, and the
lighting.
And all the holes we had to cut for the lighting and the electrical and the garage door and so forth and so on. And I already covered how much we had to, didn't we have to like take that down about 3 or 4 times?
We had very little room for error, and it's amazing about how meticulous we had to be in order not to waste materials. We didn't have that much extra paneling. So actually getting this up in one shot and not having any major structural problems with it is impressive considering our lack of expertise.
Okay, on the insulation, I decided that I wanted to put insulation in my shop because it's always been very cold in the wintertime, and there isn't insulation in the walls. There is insulation in one part of one wall, but I wanted to put insulation in, and I just thought, you know, this is an opportunity. The whole ceiling is coming down. The part that didn't fall down, I was going to pull the rest of it down. So if I was ever going to put insulation in the ceiling of the garage, which I have to admit, if I was building a house, I strongly encourage you to insulate the garage. Insulate the walls, insulate the ceiling. You say, oh, well, it's going to add some extra cost. Not compared to the benefit that you're going to get later on if you ever decide to use your garage for any more than a shop. But on the other hand, even if I was just going to use the garage to park cars in, I'd still want it insulated. It's just a good idea to insulate your garage. And I don't understand why people are so cheap. I know why contractors are cheap. They don't want to do it. Whenever they're building a spec house, they want to make it as cheap as possible and sell the thing as for expensive as they can and brush over it and make it look good. I know guys like that, and I don't necessarily appreciate them. If you have an opportunity to insulate something in your garage or your shop, I strongly encourage you to insulate it. I went ahead and insulated the entire ceiling. I would first thought that I was going to buy the type of insulation that has the paper that, I don't know what you call it, but the paper that flaps out and then you can staple it there to the ceiling joists. But I quickly realized that I wasn't going to be able to do that. Due to the whole shutdowns and delays, I was lucky to be able to get insulation at all. In fact, when I would go up to Home Depot or Lowe's, in fact, I think I bought all my insulation from Home Depot. But when I'd go up to Home Depot, they would literally have one bale of insulation there that I could buy at a time, which I could only put in so many sheets at a time. But it meant I had to go back and forth due to this delay in products that we're now experiencing, I guess worse than we were several months ago. But what I did is I could only buy one type. I couldn't buy the type that had the paper that flipped out, where you could staple it to the ceiling joist. So what I did is I bought 24-inch center insulation. It was 7 inches deep, which is the depth of my ceiling joists. And what I did is I took thatching cord, this thread that you can buy. I call it thatching cord, and it's a rough textured cord, and I put in nails all the way around on the inside of the rafter, inside of the ceiling joists, and then I strung this back and forth into a web to hold up the insulation. Now, my buddy Tom criticized me for this, made a joke out of it. That's fine. Make a joke out of whatever you want. It's the way I wanted it, and it worked. And that is the point that I want to make. It worked. It did take more time, and it did take more effort, but there's no harm in spending more time and more effort on something, especially if you're going to want to get it right. And that's exactly what I did with this thatching method that I did. I put up the string, and I'll show you some pictures of it. I put this string up, strung it all up, and then I laid the insulation in on top of it. Lots of times I'd put the insulation in ahead of time on another ceiling joist, and then when I got the thatching done, I would very gently and carefully pull the insulation over and lay it on top of the string. And I even got my son to do some of it. I even got my daughter India to do some of the thatching, and I wanted to tell my little girl that I appreciate that. I doubt seriously she's going to watch this film, but in case she does, thank you, India, for doing what you did. I was actually outside smoking cigars while she was banging away, and she did a part of the ceiling, and I appreciate it. But the insulation is something that I wanted to go over. It's fully insulated now, and I can tell the difference now that I've got the steel ceiling up and the insulation. It's a lot quieter out there in my wood shop. So let me tell you about some of the other challenges that we had. Now, there's three other things that I wanted to cover real quickly with you in this small segment. And that is that, number one, you want to make sure that when you put these panels in, they are exactly as straight as possible. Now, when I started on the other end of the garage. That would be on the interior side of, if you're looking into the garage, I started over there on the left. And that was my first panel. It was a 12-foot panel. I didn't have to cut away anything. I didn't have to measure anything. I simply had to make sure that, well, I did put a row of supports all the way down the center, simply because my ceiling joists did not match up with the 12-foot and the 10-foot. So I had to have, right down the middle, my joists are going this way. So what I did is I put in joists, short ones, about 2 feet long, because they have 24-inch centers between. That means there's 24 inches between each center of the ceiling joists up here in ceilings. And if you measure these screws and where they are, you would find that that is the exact measurement. But right in the middle, so you had one set of panels coming in, and they would literally just be hanging there because I wouldn't be able to have anything to screw the ends into. And the same thing on the other side. But by putting supports in, 24-inch supports in between these ceiling joists, I was able to have a basis to screw the very ends of the sheets in. So that's something that you have to take into consideration whenever you're putting these panels into your garage. And the other thing I'll tell you, back to what I was saying, is that putting these in straight, you've got to start straight and you've got to keep going straight. Now, one of your guides on going straight is that to make sure that each one of these ribs at the very end, there's always an overlapping rib, and make sure that these ribs line up with the rib that it goes on top of. So one rib will go on top of another rib at the very end of each strip. And it's very important, because if you get that off, or you get your ceiling panels going cockeyed, you're going to end up here over in the end, and it's going to be a major pain in the back. I thought I had it straight, and I still believe that I had it straight. Tom would argue whether I had it straight or not. I believe that I had it as straight as humanly possible. And I know for a fact on the edges of the ceiling I had this problem, and that is that this garage is not square. It is not square. It's just a little bit cockeyed, just a little bit. But see, the thing is, a room can be just a little bit off of being square, and it can completely screw you up if you're trying to stay exactly 90 degrees square on everything. So just take that into consideration. The other thing that I wanted to point out, because of these ribs and as they go in above the sheetrock, I had a gap. I had a gap that I had to deal with. And this gap you could put your hand right into the attic. Well, when I came to paint, and I'll cover this in the painting segment, but when I came in to paint, I had to caulk all of the in-between at the very ends on both sides. But again, I'll get into the painting. The other thing that I wanted to cover real quick with you, and that is that at the very end, I did have to cut the panel at the very end. On one side of the panel, I didn't have to cut it, so I basically could start at 0. But then on the inside of the panel, when I got over here, I had to cut this panel on this side, which met up with the garage door. I had to cut it in about 1.25 inches. So that meant I had a diagonal line. So I used a chalk string that you would use on sheetrock, and I very carefully placed the string on there. I did all my measurements. I measured probably 20 times to make sure, right? They say measure twice and cut once. No. Measure, and measure again, always. And so I measured, because that's what I do in my wood shop. I measure 1,000 times. Make sure I get it right, because I don't want to cut something and then all of a sudden realize that, oops, I just cut a $150 piece of wood and it's useless to me because I didn't cut it right. I have done that once before, and so that's what's made me so paranoid about measuring. And I can't say that enough, measure. So I measured it and I cut it and I sheared it, and it still wasn't right. And I think that we had to shear this one, and that means cut it all the way down. Alexander and I took turns cutting it because our hands get worn out. And I think that we had to do it about 3 or 4 times, just cutting little bits out, because I wanted it to be exactly perfect. Now, Tom criticizes me. My buddy Tom, who is the cigar rep for Paciencia Cigars. Great guy, but he's always criticizing me because he says, well, you confuse what you do in the wood shop, craftsmanship, with construction. And I admit, I agree with him. He is right. And I want to say that right here, that there is a difference between craftsmanship and construction. And I'm talking about like house construction or renovation construction. And Tom pointed out to me that renovation, or rather construction, is not an exact science as it is in craftsmanship in a wood shop. I agree, but I can't help it. I would probably really suck at building a house because it would take me forever, because I would treat it like a craftsmanship wood project, and everything in there would have to be exactly perfect. And I still look at it and I think, oh, it's not perfect, but I guess it's good enough. Now, I want to tell you right off the bat that I thought this film was going to be just one film, part A and A only. But just like the last one, I had a lot of information to convey. And so this is, again, I'm going to tell you right up the front, this is going to be